Good. It's Friday. It's a sunny, will be 70 degrees today. Beautiful. Beautiful. Good morning. Good morning, Malik. Tate's here. Yay. What have you guys been up to? What's up? What's going on? We've got Tate and Malik in attendance. We could just start reading right away. I already had my cup of coffee. It's Mother's Day weekend. Do you guys have any plans? Oh my gosh. Well, happy vaccine day. What kind did you get, Tate? Andrew's here. Yay! Everybody's getting vaccinated. I'm happy about that. I really am. Moderna. I don't know why, but the the Moderna name seems so stylish to me. I can't. You just woke up. Good. Well, good morning. Good morning. Guten Morgen. I used to say that all the time on my broadcast. Guten Morgen. Who remembers that? And I also used to drink a shot of, during quarantine, a shot of coffee flavored Jaeger. I miss that. But it's kind of expensive and I can't really afford it now. I'm on a fixed income right now. It's your birthday weekend. Happy birthday. Happy birthday to you. So many birthdays this time of year. And March too. And April. Just a lot. And then a ton of birthdays in August and September. Have you noticed that too? There's a ton of Libras out there. Leos and Libras. And it's Taurus season. It is. Samir, I'm well. Thank you for coming in. Yeah, we are enjoying this book. I'm looking very 70s today, don't you think? My hair. I'm trying to have some kind of look, some kind of cohesiveness. All right. Do we need to recap a little bit since it's Friday? Wednesday? Yes, so many birthdays, so many like presents to get, parties to attend, and in past and distant times. Thank you so much. So to recap, the last time we were together and we read this, you love being a Taurus. Don't get me started on astrology. Just don't. But I admire Taurus. They're a sister sign. I have Pisces people in my life and Taurus people that I adore. Mrs. Rachel Lind. Kimberly, welcome. We haven't started reading. You're just in time. We're just recapping what happened. Turns out Mrs. Rachel Lind, we knew she was a bit of a stuck-up gossip, but we didn't know she was just cruel. And, well, she acts like it's unwitting. She acts like it's unwitting. It was like unwitting on her part. Do you buy it? I think she meant to say it. I think she meant to call Anne ugly. I don't think it was just a slip of the tongue. Um, I think Mrs. Rachel Lynde gets some sort of satisfaction in being the mother figure of Avonlea, having had 10 children, and she feels a bit superior over Marilla, who is an old maid and has not had any children and therefore doesn't know anything about raising them, right? I think she meant to say it. And I say that because it's like, how can you and I go about the world and manage not to flat out call people ugly when we meet? What? See you next Tuesday. What? What's happening Tuesday? So Marilla, even though she also recognized Mrs. Rachel Lynde's cruelty, and see you next Tuesday. What am I what am I missing? Explain this, guys. Oh. Oh my gosh, the things I learned. I just learned this symbol. I don't know if you guys know have you seen it? And I'm not doing it right. Keep up. I know, right? I'm sorry. I live in my own world most of the time, and yeah, anyway. Um and what is a gossip? What is it? I learned that the younger folk do this now. Young people who are in here, you can tell me if I'm wrong or not, but this is like to indicate they have quote unquote ice in their veins. Yes, ice in their veins. I would have thought something else, but I am an elder millennial, so come to grips with that too recently. Someone sent me a video explaining, sorry to go off on a tangent, but here we go. Someone sent me a video recently explaining the quote generations, and they had it broken down from the silent generation to there's a sound that accompanies it. Yes, isn't this book cover amazing? There's a sound that accompanies it. And don't ask me to reproduce it. Anyway, there's the breakdown of the generations, right? You have the silent generation, you have the greatest generation. If I type something, okay. And then you have the boomers, and then you have no problem. Sorry, I didn't realize that. And then you have the well, thanks for the subscription. And then you have Generation X, right? And correct me if I'm wrong, but I always assumed, having an older sister who is of Generation X and is of that whole, Breakfast Club generation, that the reason why they're Generation X is because they're like disenfranchised from the 80s whole materialism of the 80s, and they were often left alone, and latchkey kids and things like this. There was a reason why they're Generation X as opposed to baby boomer. I've not seen this show or heard of it. And then now, and obviously, like, millennials make sense in a way. Same, Tate, same. Millennials make sense in a way because they supposedly came to age during the millennium, during the year 2000. Like they were either in high school or college during the year 2000. I was in college. Just started college. My first year, dating myself. But then things are getting shady here. Now there's Gen Z. And then now they're calling like 10-year-olds and things. My niece is 10 years old. Gen Y. Or Gen Alpha, I'm sorry. Gen Alpha. Or no, there's X, Y, Z, whatever. They're just doing letters now. And it seems very unimaginative. And if I was a younger person, I would be completely insulted. Why aren't they calling the young people Generation Mars? Why aren't they calling them Generation Mars? We've had all of these Mars missions. They will probably go to Mars, have a manned mission to Mars. Why aren't we calling them something aspirational instead of Z or Alpha? Anyway, I'm pissed about it. I'm upset, and granted, I was, yeah, exactly, a generation stolen, like, or generation betrayed. It seems lazy. It seems insulting. It's like how, as if it wasn't totally obvious that we could give a shit about our younger people in the world by how we're acting. But now we can't even come up with a name to call them. They're just Z and Alpha. Like, I'm sorry, but they can call us chuggy. They can call us like whatever they want. I don't care. We deserve it. That's my viewpoint right now. Generation Save Us, the savior generation. Like, let's come up with something respectful, maybe. Generation, they'll be wiping our asses one day. Generation, maybe, if we all live that long, if some giant rocket doesn't come land on our heads this weekend. You're laughing, but I'm pissed. All right, I think we should just start reading before I go into overdrive here. And you don't see them complaining about it because they've kind of just wrote us off. And I would too if I was a young person. We'll talk about that when we get done with this chapter. All right. Anne is expected to apologize. Anne to Mrs. Rachel Lynde. Anne would rather be thrown in a dungeon full of rats and snakes and spiders than to apologize to that what, Mrs. Rachel Lynde. Anne's apology. Marilla said nothing to Matthew about the affair that evening, but when Anne proved still refractory the next morning, an explanation had to be made to account for her absence from the breakfast table. Please, are we going to get Matthew involved in this? Matthew, the innocent, completely innocent bystander? It's a good thing Rachel Lynde got a calling down. She's a meddlesome old gossip, was Matthew's consolatory rejoinder. Matthew Cuthbert, I'm astonished at you. You know that Anne's behavior was dreadful, and yet you take her part. I suppose you'll be saying next thing that she oughtn't to be punished at all. Well, now, no, not exactly, said Matthew uneasily. I reckon she ought to be punished a little, but don't be too hard on her, Marilla. Recollect she hasn't ever had anyone to teach her right. You're going to give her something to eat, aren't you? When did you ever hear of me starving people into good behavior? Demanded Marilla indignantly. She'll have her meals regular, and I'll carry them up to her myself, but she'll stay up there until she's willing to apologize to Mrs. Lynde, and that's final, Matthew. Breakfast, dinner, and supper were very silent meals, for Anne still remained obdurate. Obdurate, that's your word for today. I'm going to type it. Or Andrew can. Obdurate. But books are also meant to be read, so let's bear that in mind too. If you handle your books roughly, well, they're made for it. After each meal, Marilla carried a well-filled tray to the east gable and brought it down later on not noticeably depleted. Matthew eyed its last descent with a troubled eye. Had Anne eaten anything at all? When Marilla went out that evening, it's not just you. It's a lot of people feel that way. When Marilla went out that evening to bring the cows back from the pasture, Matthew, who had been hanging about the barns and watching, slipped into the house with the air of a burglar and crept upstairs. As a general thing, Matthew gravitated between the kitchen and the little bedroom off the hall where he slept. Once in a while, he ventured uncomfortably into the parlor or sitting room when the minister came to tea, but he had never been upstairs in his own house since the spring he helped Marilla paper the spare bedroom. And that was 4 years ago. He just doesn't go up there. He has no need. He tiptoed along the hall and stood for several minutes outside the door of the east gable before he summoned courage to tap on it with his fingers and then opened the door to peep in. Do you love Matthew as much as I love Matthew? Who loves Matthew? Who's still here? Throw some emoji up or something and tell me how much you love him. Anne was sitting on the yellow chair by the window, gazing mournfully out into the garden. Very small and unhappy she looked, and Matthew's heart smote him. He softly closed the door and tiptoed over to her. Anne, he whispered, as if afraid of being overheard. How are you making it, Anne? Anne smiled wanly. Pretty well. I imagine a good deal, and that helps to pass the time. Of course, it's rather lonesome, but then I may as well get used to that. Anne smiled again, bravely facing the long years of solitary imprisonment before her. Matthew recollected he must say what he had come to say without loss of time, lest Marilla return prematurely. Well, now, Anne, don't you think you'd better do it and have it over with? He whispered. It'll have to be done sooner or later, for Marilla's a dreadful determined woman. Dreadful determined, Anne. Do it right off, I say, and have it over. Do you mean apologize to Mrs. Lynde? Yes, apologize. That's the very word, said Matthew eagerly. Just smooth it over, so to speak. That's what I was trying to get at. I suppose I could do it to oblige you, said Anne thoughtfully. It would be true enough to say I'm sorry, because I am sorry now. I wasn't a bit sorry last night. I was mad clear through, and I stayed mad all night. I know I did because I woke up 3 times, and I was just furious every time. But this morning, it was all over. I wasn't in a temper anymore, and it left a dreadful sort of goneness, too. I felt so ashamed of myself, but I couldn't think of going and telling Mrs. Lynde so. It would be so humiliating. I made up my mind I'd stay shut up here forever rather than do that. But still, I'd do anything for you if you really want me to. Well, now, of course I do. It's terrible lonesome downstairs without you. Just go and smooth it over. That's a good girl. Very well, said Anne resignedly. I'll tell Marilla as soon as she comes in that I've repented. That's right, Anne. But don't tell Marilla I said anything about it. She might think I was putting my oar in, and I promised not to do that. Wild horses won't drag the secret from me, promised Anne solemnly. How would wild horses drag a secret from a person anyhow? But Matthew was gone, scared at his own success. He fled hastily to the remotest corner of the horse pasture, lest Marilla should suspect what he had been up to. Marilla herself, upon her return to the house, was agreeably surprised to hear a plaintive voice calling Marilla over the banisters. Well, she said, going into the hall, I'm sorry I lost my temper and said rude things, and I'm willing to go and tell Mrs. Lynde so. Very well. Marilla's crispness gave no sign of her relief. She had been wondering what under the canopy she should do if Anne did not give in. I'll take you down after milking. Accordingly, after milking, behold Marilla and Anne walking down the lane, and the former erect and triumphant, the latter drooping and dejected. I can barely read right now. Hold on. But halfway down, Anne's dejection vanished as if by enchantment. She lifted her head and stepped lightly along, her eyes fixed on the sunset sky and an air of subdued exhilaration about her. Marilla beheld the change disapprovingly. This was no meek penitent, such as it beloved her to take into the presence of the offended Mrs. Lynde. What are you thinking of, Anne? She asked sharply. I'm imagining out what I must say to Mrs. Lynde, answered Anne dreamily. This was satisfactory, or should have been so, but Marilla could not rid herself of the notion that something in her scheme of punishment was going askew. Anne had no business to look so rapt and radiant. Rapt and radiant Anne continued until they were in the very presence of Mrs. Lynde, who was sitting knitting by her kitchen window. Then the radiance vanished. Mournful penitence appeared on every feature. Before a word was spoken, Anne suddenly went down on her knees before the astonished Mrs. Rachel and held out her hands beseechingly. Oh, Mrs. Lynde, I am so extremely sorry, she said with a quiver in her voice. I could never express all my sorrow. No, not if I used up a whole dictionary. Oh, thank you so much. You must just imagine it. I behaved terribly to you. I've disgraced the dear friends, Matthew and Marilla, who have let me stay at Green Gables, although I'm not a boy. I'm a dreadful, wicked, and ungrateful girl, and I deserve to be punished and cast out by respectable people forever. It was very wicked of me to fly into a temper because you told me the truth. I was the truth. It was the truth. Every word you said was true. My hair is red, and I'm freckled and skinny and ugly. What I said to you was true too, but I shouldn't have said it. Oh, Mrs. Lynde, please, please forgive me. If you refuse it, it will be a lifelong sorrow to me. You wouldn't like to inflict a lifelong sorrow on a poor little orphan girl, would you, even if she had a dreadful temper? Oh, I'm sure you wouldn't. Please say you forgive me, Mrs. Lynde. What do you think of this apology? Anne clasped her hands together, bowed her head, and waited for the word of judgment. There was no mistaking her sincerity. It breathed in every tone of her voice. Both Marilla and Mrs. Lynde recognized its unmistakable ring, but the former understood in dismay that Anne was actually enjoying her valley of humiliation, was reveling in the thoroughness of her abasement. Where was the wholesome punishment upon which she, Marilla, had plumed herself? Anne had turned into a species of positive pleasure. Good. I think Anne, in some ways, Anne has has life all figured out, right? Good Mrs. Lynde, not being overburdened with perception, did not see this. She only perceived that Anne had made a very thorough apology, and all resentment vanished from her kindly, if somewhat officious heart. There, get up, child, she said heartily. Of course I forgive you. I guess I was a little too hard on you anyway. But I'm such an outspoken person. You mustn't mind me, that's what. It's a very dramatic way. If you're crawling on your knees and she's clasping her hands like this and making these like very dramatic statements, and she's on her hands and knees, or her knees anyway. She only perceived that Anne had made a very thorough apology, and all resentment vanished from her kindly, if somewhat officious heart. There, get up, child, she said heartily. Of course I forgive you. I guess I was a little too hard on you anyway. But I'm such an outspoken person. You mustn't mind me, that's what. It can't be denied your hair is terrible red. But I knew a girl once, went to school with her, in fact, whose hair was every mite as red as yours when she was young, but when she grew up it darkened to real handsome auburn. Wouldn't that be a mite? I wouldn't be a mite surprised if yours did too. Not a mite. Oh, Mrs. Lynde! Anne drew a long breath as she rose to her feet. You have given me a hope. I shall always feel that you're a benefactor. Oh, I could endure anything if I only thought my hair would be a handsome auburn when I grew up. It would be so much easier to be good if one's hair was a handsome auburn, don't you think? And now, may I go out into your garden and sit on that bench under the apple trees while you and Marilla are talking? There is so much more scope for the imagination out there. Laws, yes. Run along, child, and you can pick a bouquet of them white June lilies over in the corner if you like. As the door closed behind Anne, Mrs. Lynde got briskly up to light a lamp. She's a real odd little thing. Take this chair, Marilla. It's easier than the one you've got. I just keep that for the hired boy to sit on. Yes, she certainly is an odd child, but there's something kind of taking about her after all. I don't feel so surprised at you and Matthew keeping her as I did, nor so sorry for you either. She may turn out all right. Of course, she has a queer way of expressing herself, a little too, well, too kind of forcible, you know, but she'll likely get over that now that she's come to live among civilized folks. And then her temper's pretty quick, I guess, but there's one comfort. A child that has a quick temper, just blaze up and cool down, ain't never likely to be sly or deceitful. Preserve me from a sly child, that's what. On the whole, Marilla, I kind of like her. Excuse me. Excuse my dog. When Marilla went home, Anne came out of the fragrant twilight of the orchard with a sheaf of white narcissi in her hands. I apologized pretty well, didn't I? She said proudly as they went down the lane. I thought since I had to do it, I might as well do it thoroughly. You did it thoroughly, all right enough, was Marilla's comment. Marilla was dismayed at finding herself inclined to laugh over the recollection. She had also an uneasy feeling that she ought to scold Anne for apologizing so well, but then that was ridiculous. She compromised with her conscience by saying severely, I hope you won't have occasion to make many more of such apologies. I hope you'll try to control your temper now, Anne. That wouldn't be so hard if people wouldn't twit me about my looks, said Anne with a sigh. I don't get cross about other things, but I'm so tired of being twitted about my hair, and it just makes me boil right over. Do you suppose my hair will really be a handsome auburn when I grow up? You shouldn't think so much about your looks, Anne. I'm afraid you're a very vain little girl. How can I be vain when I know I'm homely? Protested Anne. I love pretty things. I hate to look in the glass and see something that isn't pretty. It makes me feel so sorrowful, just as I feel when I look at any ugly thing. I pity it because it isn't beautiful. Handsome is as handsome does, quoted Marilla. I've heard that said to me before, but I have my doubts about it, remarked skeptical Anne, sniffing her narcissi. Oh, aren't these flowers sweet? It was lovely of Mrs. Lynde to give them to me. I have no hard feelings against Mrs. Lynde now. It gives you a lovely, comfortable feeling to apologize and be forgiven, doesn't it? Aren't the stars bright tonight? If you could live in a star, which one would you pick? I'd like that lovely, clear, big one away over there above that dark hill. Good morning, Kelly. Anne, do hold your tongue, said Marilla, thoroughly worn out, trying to follow the gyrations of Anne's thoughts. Anne said no more until they turned into their own lane. A little gypsy wind came down to meet them, laden with the spicy perfume of young dew-wet ferns. Far up in the shadows, a cheerful light gleamed out through the trees from the kitchen at Green Gables. Anne suddenly came close to Marilla and slipped her hand into the older woman's hard palm. It's lovely to be going home and know it's home, she said. I love Green Gables already, and I never loved any place before. No place ever seemed like home. Oh, Marilla, I'm so happy. I could pray right now and not find it a bit hard. Something warm and pleasant welled up in Marilla's heart at the touch of the thin little hand in her own. A throb of the maternity she had missed, perhaps. Its very unaccustomedness and sweetness disturbed her. She hastened to restore her sensations to their normal calm by inculcating a moral. If you'll be a good girl, you'll always be happy, Anne. And you should never find it hard to say your prayers. Saying one's prayers isn't exactly the same thing as praying, said Anne meditatively. Isn't that the truth? But I'm going to imagine that I'm the wind that is blowing up there in those treetops. When I get tired of the trees, I'll imagine I'm gently waving down here in the ferns, and then I'll fly over to Mrs. Lynde's garden and set the flowers dancing. And then I'll go with one great swoop over the clover field, and then I'll blow over the lake of shining waters and ripple it all up into little sparkling waves. Oh, there's so much scope for imagination in a wind. So I'll not talk any more just now, Marilla. Thanks be to goodness for that, breathed Marilla in devout relief. And that's chapter 10. Dare we do another one? I feel like my reading isn't very good today. What do you guys think? Are you done? Are we done? Is there anyone here still left? Okay. I'll do one. This isn't very long. This isn't very long, and we can talk about. Are you guys really enjoying? I just really love the little snippets of the wind, the trees, the place. It's just calling me. You can see why you want to go visit Prince Edward Island like I do, right? Who wants to go? Who wants to go visit Prince Edward Island? Look at my cat. Isn't it just the dreamiest? And I think we should go during June, because that's when that whole scene, like when the white way of delight, the flowers are blooming and the orchards are blooming. We should go when it's all in bloom in June. All right, chapter 11. Anne's impressions of Sunday school. Here we go. Well, we'll have to wait till this plague leaves us. In the meantime, we'll imagine. We'll be like Anne, and we'll imagine ourselves bidding the Snow Queen good morning when we wake up. Here we go. The heathen goes to Sunday school. the child who finds it difficult to pray. She can say her prayers. That's not the hard part. It's actually meaning what she's saying. Well, now, how do you like them? Said Marilla. Anne was standing in the gable room, looking solemnly at 3 new dresses spread out on the bed. One was of snuffy-colored gingham, which Marilla had been tempted to buy from a peddler the preceding summer because it looked so serviceable. One was of black and white checked sateen, which she had picked up at a bargain counter in the winter, and one was a stiff print of an ugly blue shade, which she had purchased that week at a Carmody store. She had made them up herself, and they were all made alike. Plain skirts, fulled tightly to plain waists, with sleeves as plain as waist and skirt as tight as sleeves could be. I'll imagine that I like them, said Anne soberly. Aesthetics, they're important. She's already thinks she's homely. So you're going to make her ugly blue dresses and expect her to feel great about it? I don't want you to imagine it, said Marilla, offended. Oh, I can see you don't like the dresses. What is the matter with them? Aren't they neat and clean and new? Yes. Then why don't you like them? They're not pretty, said Anne reluctantly. Pretty? Marilla snuffed. I don't trouble my head about getting pretty dresses for you. I don't believe in pampering vanity, Anne. I'll tell you that right off. Those dresses are good, sensible, serviceable dresses without any frills or furbelows. Let's type that one in. It came up in my automatically. That's amazing. I don't know that word. Furbelows about them, and they're all you'll get this summer. The brown gingham and the blue print will do you for school when you begin to go. The sateen is for church and Sunday school. I'll expect you to keep them neat and clean and not to tear them. I should think you'd be grateful to get most anything after those skimpy, wincy things you've been wearing. Oh, I am grateful, protested Anne, but I'd ever be so much gratefuler if you just made one of them with puff sleeves. Puff sleeves are so fashionable now. It would give me such a thrill, Marilla, just to wear a dress with puff sleeves. Same. Well, you'll have to do without your thrill. I hadn't any material. None of those. There's no furbelows, Samir, on these dresses. I think they're ridiculous looking things anyhow. I prefer the plain, sensible ones. But I'd rather look ridiculous when everyone else does than plain and sensible all by myself, persisted Anne mournfully. Trust you for that. Well, hang those dresses carefully up in your closet and then sit down and learn the Sunday school lesson. I've got a quarterly from Mr. Bell for you, and you'll go to Sunday school tomorrow, said Marilla, disappearing downstairs in high dudgeon. Anne clasped her hands and looked at the dresses. I did hope there would be a white one with puff sleeves, she whispered disconsolately. I prayed for one, but I didn't much expect it on that account. You're very welcome. I didn't suppose God would have time to bother about a little orphan girl's dress. I knew I'd just have to depend on Marilla for it. Well, fortunately, I can imagine that one of them is of snow white muslin with lovely lace frills and 3 puffed sleeves. Oh, 3 puffed sleeves. The next morning, warnings of a sick headache prevented Marilla from going to Sunday school with Anne. You'll have to go down and call for Mrs. Lynde, Anne, she said. She'll see that you get into the right class. Now, mind you behave yourself properly. Stay to preaching afterwards and ask Mrs. Lynde to show you our pew. Here's a cent for collection. Don't stare at people and don't fidget. I shall expect you to tell me the text when you come home. Anne started off irreproachably, arrayed in the stiff black and white sateen, which, while decent as regards length and certainly not open to the charge of skimpiness, contrived to emphasize every corner and angle of her thin figure. Her hat was a little flat, glossy new sailor, and the extreme plainness of which had likewise much disappointed Anne, who had permitted herself secret visions of ribbon and flowers. So you can kind of see this is the little sailor hat. It's kind of her trademark in the book. The plain dress with the plain little hat. The latter, however, were supplied before Anne reached the main road, for being confronted halfway down the lane with a golden frenzy of wind-stirred buttercups and a glory of wild roses, Anne promptly and liberally garlanded her hat with a heavy wreath of them. Whatever other people might have thought of the result, it satisfied Anne, and she tripped gaily down the road, holding her ruddy head with its decoration of pink and yellow very proudly. When she reached Mrs. Lynde's house, she found that lady gone. Nothing daunted, Anne proceeded onward to the church alone. In the porch she found a crowd of little girls, all more or less gaily attired in whites and blues and pinks, and all staring with curious eyes at the stranger in their midst, with her extraordinary head adornment. Avonlea little girls had already heard queer stories about Anne. Mrs. Lynde said she had an awful temper. Jerry Butte, the hired boy at Green Gables, said she talked all the time to herself or to the trees and flowers like a crazy girl. They looked at her and whispered to each other behind their quarterlies. Nobody made any friendly advances then or later on when the opening exercises were over and Anne found herself in Miss Rogerson's class. Miss Rogerson was a middle-aged lady who had taught a Sunday school class for 20 years. Her method of teaching was to ask the printed questions from the quarterly and look sternly over its edge at the particular little girl she thought ought to answer the question. She looked very often at Anne, and Anne, thanks to Marilla's drilling, answered promptly, but it may be questioned if she understood very much about either question or answer. She did not think she liked Mrs. Rogerson, and she felt very miserable. Every other little girl in class had puffed sleeves. Anne felt that life was really not worth living without puffed sleeves. Well, how did you like Sunday school? Marilla wanted to know when Anne came home. Her wreath having faded, Anne had discarded it in the lane, so Marilla was spared the knowledge of that for a time. I didn't like it a bit. It was horrid. Anne Shirley, said Marilla rebukingly. Anne sat down on the rocker with a long sigh, kissed one of the bonny's leaves, and waved her hand to a blossoming fuchsia. They might have been lonesome while I was away, she explained. And now, about the Sunday school. I behaved well, just as you told me. Mrs. Lynde was gone, but I went right on myself. I went into the church with a lot of other little girls, and I sat in the corner of a pew by the window while the opening exercises went on. Mr. Bell made an awfully long prayer. I would have been dreadfully tired before he got through if I hadn't been sitting by that window. But it looked right out on the lake of shining waters. So I just gazed at that and imagined all sorts of splendid things. You shouldn't have done anything of the sort. You should have listened to Mr. Bell. But he wasn't talking to me, protested Anne. He was talking to God, and he didn't seem to be very much interested in it either. I think he thought God was too far off to make it worthwhile. I said a little prayer myself, though. There was a long row of white birches hanging over the lake, and the sunshine fell through them, way down deep into the water. Oh, Marilla, it was like a beautiful dream. It gave me a thrill, and I just said, thank you for it, God, 2 or 3 times. Not out loud, I hope, said Marilla anxiously. Oh, no, just under my breath. Well, Mr. Bell did get through at last. Get through at last, and they told me to go into the classroom with Mrs. Rogerson's class. There were 9 other girls in it. They all had puffed sleeves. 9 other girls, and they all had puffed sleeves? I tried to imagine mine were puffed too, but I couldn't. Why couldn't I? It was as easy as could be to imagine they were puffed when I was alone in the East Gable, but it was awfully hard there among the others who had really truly puffs. You shouldn't have been thinking about your sleeves and Sunday school. You should have been attending to the lesson. I hope you knew it. Oh, yes, and I answered a lot of questions. Miss Rogerson asked ever so many. I don't think it was fair for her to do all the asking. There were lots I wanted to ask her, but I didn't like to because I didn't think she was a kindred spirit. Then all the other girls recited a paraphrase. She asked me if I knew any. I told her I didn't, but I could recite The Dog at His Master's Grave if she liked. That's in the Third Royal Reader. It isn't a really, truly religious piece of poetry, but it's so sad and melancholy that it might as well be. She said it wouldn't do, and she told me to learn the 19th paraphrase for next Sunday. I read it over in church afterwards, and it's splendid. There are 2 lines in particular that just thrill me. Quick as the slaughtered squadrons fell in Midian's evil day. I don't know what squadron means, nor Midian either, but it sounds so tragical. I can hardly wait until next Sunday to recite it. I'll practice it all the week. After Sunday school, I asked Miss Rogerson, because Mrs. Lynde was too far away. Thank you, Kelly. To show me your pew. I just sat as still as I could, and the text was Revelation's 3rd chapter, 2nd and 3rd verses. It was a very long text. If I was a minister, I'd pick the short, snappy ones. The sermon was awfully long, too. I suppose the minister had to match it to the text. I don't think he was a bit interesting. The trouble with him seems to be that he hasn't enough imagination. I didn't listen to him very much. I just let my thoughts run, and I thought of the most surprising things. Marilla felt helplessly that all this should be sternly reproved, but she was hampered by the undeniable fact that some of the things Anne had said, especially about the minister's sermon and Mr. Bell's prayers, were what she herself had really thought deep down in her heart for years, but had never given expression to. It almost seemed to her that those secret, unuttered, critical thoughts had suddenly taken visible and accusing shape and form in the person of this outspoken morsel of neglected humanity. Thank you so much, guys. And that's chapter 11. As expected, Sunday school had no effect on Anne. She wasn't suddenly saved. She didn't suddenly become infused with the Holy Spirit. All right, friends. Everyone have a wonderful weekend. I will be back on Monday morning at 9 a.m. And I hope you guys can come. We can rage about well, thank you so much, Samir. We can rage about naming generations and come up with better names for our younger people, as if they care. If I was a young person,